Hello and welcome to another video for the recreational cyclist. This is a video that will allow you to realize what you're buying and be able to get into cycling for very little money and become fit or maintain your fitness or lose weight or whatever you want to do with the cycling. But there seems to be a lot of confusion today about how and why bikes cost anywhere from $200 at Walmart to $15,000 for a top-end racing bike. And I hope by the end of this video you will know, and this will be a video linked to another video explaining some of the good parts that you would be looking for on a bicycle. So let's get started. Now, is there one bike that can do it all? And yes there is. I'm standing in front of it now. This is a conventional mountain bike, nothing special, very inexpensive, but everything on here is ultra strong. The frame is strong, all the parts on it are strong, the wheels have been replaced with stronger wheels, and it's a very strong and dependable bike that I have rigged for road riding. And the only difference between this road riding and mountain bike riding is I've got road tires instead of off-road tires, and I have aero bars for the road. I also have bar ends and different hand positions for the road. So this is equipped as well for the road as it is off-road. It can be the gravel bike that you wanted, it can be a road bike, it can be off-road, it can do anything you want it to do. And you can tour with it. You can certainly tour with this bike easier than any touring bike can tour. And of course today the trailers are so good for touring that I suggest using trailers for touring and not doing the conventional baggage loaded up bike. So that's what makes this bike good for everything. Well, it's simply because it's a mountain bike. It's built extra strong, so you already get an extra strong bike. It comes with extra strong wheels, and it's built for more rough terrain, so the frame has to be able to take all that bouncing. Now it comes with a suspension fork, and you do not want to buy any bike with a suspension fork if it doesn't have a lockout. A lockout is a lever that you can turn either on the fork The lockout fork is something that is able to lock out the suspension. There, suspension's open. Here it's locked. You don't want to ride suspension on the road unless the road is extremely rough. So this bike does do it all, and it becomes the best idea for your first bike. For one, it's good for all kinds of people. You could be the most fit person in the world, or you could be 50 to 100 pounds overweight and still be able to ride this bike. Mainly because the bike's made so strong, and the wheels are 26-inch, which makes those extra strong too. So not only is it a bike that can do all terrains, road, off-road, gravel road, whatever, it can also take any kind of rider too. Now, the only reason you would not want one of the more inexpensive bikes is by pure weight alone. You can't lift it up on your car to put it in a bike rack. In that case, you would have to spend a lot more money than this one costs. This one averages around $350. In a bike store, this would cost about $600 to $650. But price alone does not tell you the quality of a bike. It's the components that are on it and who designed the frame, but not so much who built the frame. The design of the frame is just as important as who builds the frame. And the manufacturer of the bike, in this case, Dawes put their name on it, but all they did is build the frame. That's the only thing they did. And they didn't even build it. They just designed it and then sent their specifications to China for it to be all welded together as a bike frame. everything else on this bike is made by someone else. And that's the way most bikes are. There's very few bike companies, Trek being linked with Bontrager, I think they're linked with Bontrager, being about the only one I know that actually makes parts as well as the bicycle. So when you're buying a bike from a manufacturer, the only thing you're buying is the frame. Everything else is what everybody else buys for their bikes. So what's the quality of the frame? Well, these are cheap frames, and even the higher up frames. Basically about 95 to 98% of every frame now is made in China. This being aluminum, China has gotten to be absolute experts at building aluminum frames, and probably steel frames too. It's been a while since I bought a steel. But for aluminum, they've got it down to a manufacturing art. So while China may build some things that aren't very good, where they copy other people and then try to sell it at half the price, when it comes to building bike frames, they've got that down to a science. And they are building frames for probably every major bike company, and of course any minor bike company. If you go into a Trek or a Specialized dealer or a Giant or any of the big names, pretty much 3/4 to 7/8 of their entire bike line, the frame is made in China. Why? Because they're inexpensive and they're as good as they get. I had a friend whose profession was welding. He's been a welder for 50 years. He came into my house, his eyes got great big, wide open, his jaw dropped. He was looking at the welds on my bike. He couldn't believe the quality of the weld. It was jaw-dropping for him. It was just beautiful welds. So you take a good designed bike, you give it to someone, you give those specifications to someone to build it and weld it together, and you end up with a frame that will last you for a very, very long time and be a very good feeling bike on the road. It won't feel dead, it feels lively. And what makes a bike frame feel lively? And that's the design. These tubes aren't just plain tubes. They may be thicker. This area here may be thicker than this area here, and then it may get thicker again. They like to design these with different size walls to them, so that as they get closer to the welds and closer to the joints, the tube gets thicker and stronger. And then we're in the middle, where it's not needed to have as much strength, it gets thinner. That way they can build the lightest tube into the bike and make the bike as light as possible. Now how important is a light bike? It's like I said, the only importance is as long as it's not exorbitant weight. If it's under 30 pounds, it's probably fine for everybody. Now whether or not you can physically lift a bike and put 30 pounds up on the top of a bike rack, that may be the problem, and that may be part of your decision, but that would be basically the only thing. The bicycle weight doesn't make any difference to a recreational rider who's just simply riding around with by himself or with a friend. I mean, here I am up on the mountains today. This is the heaviest bike you can buy, heaviest bike I've ever owned. The way it's equipped, it's up around 50 pounds. Between the water, my tools, and extra stuff I brought today, I have about 50 pounds worth of bike. But as a recreational rider, I'm not sprinting, I'm not accelerating, I'm not jumping, I'm not attacking like I would be in racing. So when I'm climbing a hill, all I'm doing is constant speed. Once the weight's moving, it really doesn't matter that much. And hills are about the only place the weight would matter anyway. And acceleration. But again, acceleration, we're talking a second's difference or something between accelerating on this and accelerating on the lightest bike you could buy. So again, I've got a whole video on the weight scam. You can check that one out if you like. But this is about recreational riding only, and this bike pretty much covers it all. So when you're talking about the frame, we're talking about the only part that the manufacturer makes. So we're talking about a good design, and most manufacturers know how to design good aluminum bikes, especially the manufacturers have been around for a while. Nowadays, you got just about everybody wanting to build a bike because they're seeing the huge profit margins in these stupid bikes that cost $10,000. And now we've got an e-bike market, electric assist motorbike market, where everybody's jumping in who have never built a bike before. So whether they hired good people to design their bike, I don't know. But we're talking about a whole new list of manufacturers out there who are building bikes who may not have any experience in bike building. So who knows what you're getting on these brand new companies, especially these e-bike companies. Because the e-bikes take a heck of a lot more torque. Twice the torque that a racer could put into a conventional bike. So the bikes have to be built extra strong with that in mind too. So this is an extra strong frame, which means there's no flex when I'm really standing up on a hill, really cranking hard. There can be a flex in what's called the bottom bracket, where the bike will flex back and forth, where it doesn't feel good, where you lose energy, and sometimes they would flex so much the chain would actually go into the derailleur from the flex. But this one doesn't do that. I'm getting good ride quality and good stiff frame for performance, and a light enough frame for me to actually ride. Now when it comes to comfort, everybody wants to look at the frame. They think that all the comfort comes from the frame, and it really doesn't. Most of your comfort comes from the fork. So you need a good designed fork. And in this case, comfort levels is almost non-existent because it's a suspension fork. I can adjust this fork to be any amount of suspension and match the roughness of the road. I can do whatever I want. If you're buying a bike with a rigid fork, and you really can't find too many mountain bikes with rigid forks anymore, so it'd have to be aftermarket, and there's very few aftermarket forks you can add to a mountain bike that are rigid. Very few. It's amazing how little there is out there for forks. And forks make the biggest difference. But like I said, with a suspension fork, you definitely do not want the full-time suspension. You have to get the lockout. That's full suspension would suck so much energy out of you, it wouldn't be worth it. So do not go so cheap that you get a non-lockout fork. Now, of course, if you don't like the fork, there's hundreds or thousands of different suspension forks choices out there. It's just a rigid fork. There's just a tiny little market of rigid forks out there to choose from. So you're still covered with suspension fork. You could go out and buy a really nice suspension fork that would cost 3 times what the bike costs very easily. Okay, so we're starting with a good frame. Manufacturer's name, like I said, really doesn't matter much anymore. There's like four factories in China making almost all the bikes. So whether you bought a Bianchi or a Specialized or a Giant, it probably came, or there's a good chance it came from the same factory made by the same people. So we don't really care what name's on the bike anymore. All we care about is who designed it, how good of the design it was, and the only way you're going to get that is by test riding it. And for beginners, they're not going to know the difference for that. So next you got to find an expert review. And of course, everybody, all the reviewers out there, all they care about is racing bikes. All they care about is high-end stuff. They're all a bunch of bike nerds who care about the equipment more than they care about fitness, or equally, I don't know. So buying a bike frame becomes very, very difficult. It's pretty much a hit and miss thing. You try to get lucky. You try to get lucky and hit on the right frame. But it's a hit and miss thing. And of course, your first bike, you can make all kinds of mistakes on your first bike. It really doesn't matter. Ride it for a couple of years, ride it for 6 months. As soon as you get to know the bike, as soon as you get more higher skilled on the bike, you'll know what your next purchase is going to be. So if you bought a bike like this, and you spent 99% of your time off-road and you really hated the road, hate riding with cars, well, you can certainly, on your next bike, be much more specific about what you want. So we got this manufactured frame that was designed well. Now we have to equip it with parts. So what kind of parts are good and what kind of parts are bad? Well, the first and cheapest thing they usually put on a bike is the crankset. Crankset is one of the most expensive parts on the bike, and to get the price of the bike to come down quickly, that's the easiest way to do it, is to put a cheap crankset on there. Now there are cheap cranksets out there that I have broken the arm in half because they're so bad. An aluminum arm cracked right in half simply from pedaling up a hill. That is a bad crank. And most of those bad cranks don't even have names on them. So you don't even have anybody to call or blame when it happens. Now, breaking a crank arm in half can be a dangerous or even a deadly thing to happen. So I'm very picky about my cranksets. So after testing a lot of cranksets, that are all mountain bike cranksets for the last about the last 20 years, I've been using mountain cranksets. I've come to the conclusion that in today's market, this is a Suntour on this one. This is a Suntour XCT. You can't go wrong with this crank. It's as good as any of them. As good as any of them. Again, I don't care what it weighs. All I care about is how strong it is. I've been using these XCT cranks for years, never broke one. Never heard one creak or crack or anything. They're as good as they get. That's Suntour. Shimano, I've been using the Alivio for most of my bikes. The Alivio crankset has been absolutely excellent. Again, just as strong as this one, no problems. Before that, I was using the Shimano XT, which was also a great crank. The XT line of Shimano is a line for any recreational cyclist to view it as the very top tier. And even though that the XT line is kind of the middle of the Shimano line, for the recreational cyclist, XT, that's as high as you want to go, because that is as strong and as perfect as equipment as you could buy. If you go above XT, it's all just a waste of money. If you're racing, that's a completely different story. Again, we're talking recreational today. Racing has nothing to do with it. And if you're racing, this is the last bike in the world you'd want to buy. But the difference between riding in a race and riding on the road recreational is night and day, polar opposites, have very little or almost nothing to do with each other. And that's where the weight, everybody's worried about weight on a bike, which is ridiculous, because if you're a recreation rider, it doesn't matter. Mainly because the weight reduction on racing bikes are used for in pelotons or when you're drafting. You see these guys really close together, they're drafting. When you're drafting, you're constantly braking as the peloton yo-yos back and forth in speed. You're constantly braking and then re-accelerating and braking, re-accelerating. You've got to have lightweight wheels, you got to have lightweight bike to be in that peloton and not get fatigued more than anybody else. Then you got sprinting at the end of the race. Again, you need lightweight wheels, lightweight bike. You need an extremely strong bike for if you're a pro rider doing a sprint at the end of the race. You're going to put a lot of wattage down into that bike, and you don't want the crank breaking, you don't want a frame cracking, you don't want any of that happening. And then on top of that, you got jumps where you're just jumping ahead to get caught up, maybe 100 yards, you're jumping ahead to get caught up behind somebody on a wheel. And then you have attacking too. You're going to maybe attack off the front before the hill climb and get yourself up in front so that you can pull away from the peloton on the hill climb. You know, none of these things you use in recreational cycling. Now, recreational cycling in clubs, they do like to ride close together. They do like to draft and things like that. So if you're doing that, then of course, that's the same as racing. You're going to need a racing bike. But if you're a beginner rider, that is the last place in the world you're going to want to be, because crashing on a bike is something you don't ever want to do. And being in a group of riders with tires this close together and bikes that close together where there's bumping going on and all kinds of things, that's not a place for a beginner or even an intermediate rider. You want to be the most confident expert rider you can be before you get into a group like that. Because there's nothing good about cycling if all you're going to do is be crashing and hurting yourself. Cycling can be a safe sport. Like I said, I got 500,000 miles. I was brushed by a car once when I was like 12 years old on a bike, very inexperienced. They knocked me down, and that's the only time I've ever been involved in an accident. Now I've fallen off the bike plenty of times, misjudging, in my inexperienced days I would misjudge wet pavement and make a corner too fast and fall down, and I've learned and learned and learned. I have another video. All these videos I'm referring to I'm going to put down in the description section for links. I have another video that teaches you the advanced riding techniques, and that video is available to you too. So now we have a bike that we're looking for good components. We got a good crankset on here. Derailleurs. I have not used a SRAM derailleur, but I have used just about all the Shimano derailleurs, and that's about the only derailleur I've ever used. Back in the old racing days, I was using Sun Tour derailleurs with a Campanolo Super Record equipped bike. But since then, they've all been Shimano's, and they all shift just fine. This is the Acer model on here. I've used the Acer. I've used the Alivio, which is excellent, and the XT, or the Dior, which again are XT. So, are excellent derailleurs. So, the Alivio or the Dior are going to be top-end derailleurs, and the ones below it still work fine, except I think the springs are weaker, and the construction's a little weaker, and the derailleur simply doesn't last as long. So basically they all shift fine. All the derailleurs shift fine, and the derailleur's only half of it. The other half is the actual shifters, of course. And on this bike, these are Shimano's, some of Shimano's cheapest shifters that don't really even have a name on them. They're just a number. So they're not even in the line. They're not Alivio or they're not Dior. They're not even a lineup of that. And this bike shifts perfectly fine. Absolutely perfectly fine. This is the third year I've been riding it. That's 3 years on a no-name, well, it's a Shimano shifter, but one of their lowest line. And again, it's just shifting fine. Now, when these break and I want to upgrade, I'll buy a Alivio, or I'll buy a Alivio shifters, or I'll buy maybe a Dior shifter. I have an extra set. I have an extra set of shifters at home right now that are Dior's that I could easily put on here. Now this is a 8-speed cog in the back with 3-speed on the front, which gives it 24 gears. Now a lot of people are going, oh, 8-speed, that's no good. Well, the number of teeth or number of gears on the cassette back here, this is the cassette. That's where you do most of your shifting. The number of gears, whether it's has 8 gears, 9 gears, 10, 11 gears. I think there's a 12 gear out there now. Number of gears have nothing to do with the quality. I get just as much, mileage out of these because the cassette and the chain is some of your biggest wear parts, along with the tires. About every 3,000 miles, a chain's going to wear out, and is going to wear out the cassette along with it. As the chain wears out, the links get spaced farther and farther apart, and it carves out the teeth of the cassette. Now, eventually it'll carve out the teeth of the crankset too, but it takes 10 times longer for that to happen. So about every 3,000 miles, I'm putting a new cassette and a new chain on the bike. Same way with tires, about every 3,000 miles putting tires on. Okay, so now we got a drivetrain. We got just plain old shifters, we got a very low line Shimano derailleur on here, and everything is just working perfectly. Everything's working fine. So I've not spent much money there either. Now the additions I made to this bike was to make it a road bike. So I have got road tires on here. And if you want the biggest speed difference of all there is on a bicycle, forget everything everybody tells you about aerodynamics and everything else like that of a bike. The biggest speed difference is going to be your body. Your body, air hitting your body is the thing that slows you down the most on the bike. And the next thing is tires. All tires look the same, but some tires will roll so much faster than other tires. There's just a huge difference between a bad rolling tire and a good rolling tire. And also, if you're like me, you don't want to repair flats on the road. So this bike is equipped with one of Schwab's best tires. This is called the Schwab Marathon Plus tire. The size is 26 inch by 2 inch. It's 2 inches wide tire. Go, gotta wait on a car again here. Usually not that much traffic out here. So, you know, you say a 2 inch tire on the road, that's ridiculous. That's going to slow you down. And no. If anything, if your road conditions aren't absolutely glass smooth perfect, a fatter tire is going to be faster than the thinner racing tires that you would find on a racing bike. A fatter tire is going to be more comfortable than those thinner racing bike tires. I have a friend that's a randonneer. Randonneers are people that race long distance. They kind of tour long distance. I don't know if they call it a race, but you know, it's like 400 plus miles is the start and finish. And all those people are going to fatter tires because the road conditions are cheese grater or not just this perfectly smooth road like you get on the interstates. And they find that these larger tires with less air pressure actually roll better than the very thin high pressure tires you find on racing bikes. So I've been riding long distance on the road with a very fat tire. This is a 26 inch, 2 inch wide tire. And they just roll fantastic. They roll fantastic. And the other advantage of the fat tire is the profile. Here's the top of the rim, here's the top of the tire. These are 26 inch wheels. The 700C wheels that they use on racing bikes were found to be the best compromise between speed and weight. If the wheels get too small, they start to drag. If they get too big, then they start to be too cumbersome. And a big wheel is hard to build into a bike anyway. A 26 inch wheel with a fatter 2 inch tire comes up to the same size as a 700C with a tiny little 1 inch tire. So you can't beat it. Now you got a 26 inch wheel that's 3 times stronger than a 700C racing wheel. That's the same size because the tire sits so high. So the overall diameter of the wheel and tire is about the same as a racing wheel. So we haven't lost anything there either. Now when it comes to safety, you know, brakes are next. What kind of brakes are you going to get? Well, they've been putting hydraulic on almost everything right now. I've never ridden hydraulic because I don't think there's any way to repair a hydraulic brake on the road. If it starts to leak, I think you're out of luck. I don't think there's any way to repair a hydraulic brake on the road, so I have avoided them like the plague. And I've been using these Tektros Novella, N-O-V-E-L-A or L-L-A, Tektro Novella brakes. And these are cable actuated brakes, and they are fantastic. Easy to replace the brake shoes. All you do is take the wheel out. They're magnetically stuck to the brake caliper, And you just pull them out, put the new ones in, and as soon as you put the wheel in and the disc gets in between the brakes and the brake pad and the brake caliper, they can't fall out. So it's one of the finest design, finest working brake out there. Tektro Novella. So you're looking for that in disc brakes. I don't advise buying any bike with the old-fashioned rim brake. I never liked rim brakes from the very beginning because the wheel is one of the weakest parts of the bike, and I never liked the idea of wearing down the wheel. You're actually braking on the wheel surface and making it thinner and thinner every time you brake. So, and they don't work well in water, all that, in a rain situation anyway. So buy it, just buy a disc brake. Get these Tektro Novellas on here, and you're going to have a fine working, very safe braking bike. Okay, so we got a drivetrain, we got shifters, we got brakes. This is my handlebar system. There's very few people in the world I've ever seen do this. I started this back in 1995 or so, when aero bars first came out being manufactured for consumers. Okay, so we got a handlebar system that I replaced the normal system with. This is just a flat bar, there's no rise on it. You got to have the flat bar to be able to clip on the aero bars. And then I have bar ends. I'll show you a picture of these up close in the video. When riding long distance on the road, you need lots of positions. So I got three main positions: the regular position for flat bars, the extensions, and the aero bars. The aero bars take all the pressure off the hands. No road bike can do that for you. Even though the road bike is very well designed with the drop bars, it gives you three main positions, and it gives you two positions that are right next to the brakes all the time, which you need in a race. When you're in a peloton, you may be braking every 5 to 10 seconds. If it's a more inexperienced the peloton is, the more it's going to yo-yo, and the more you're going to have to brake and re-accelerate. Out on the road recreational riding, that's not even close to the point. Out here in the country, I'm only braking maybe downhill or around a very sharp corner, but even that would be unusual. So the brakes get used practically none out here. Where racing, you'll be using the brakes 10,000 to 1 over recreational riding. So that's why the aero bars, when you're outside of the town, out on a nice quiet road, you can get down into the aero bars, give the hands a rest. And the main disadvantage of a mountain bike being used on the road is, again, all that air pressure hitting you from sitting upright too much. Again, the aero bars solve that problem and put you in the same position as you would with drop bars on a road bike. So basically the road bike drop bar configuration is really only good for racing anymore, because this configuration I have is so much better for the road than a road bike can ever be. Mainly because I can take 100% of the pressure off my hands and my wrists and everything else by going to the aero bar position. You cannot do that on a road bike. So I've got the perfect road bike. And I always put racks on my bike so I can put a big trunk back here. Because when you're out on the road, you're by yourself, you got to be self-sufficient. You got to be self-sufficient. On a warm day, that's nice. You don't have to take too many extra clothes. But I got my air pump back here. I got an extra air pump because air pumps are being made so horribly. I got two inner tubes with me. I have a bag full of bag full of tools, and I had a bag full of cleanup stuff. I got rubber gloves and tissues in here for if I have mechanical repair, and that keeps my hands from getting dirty. And of course I got keys and money and ID. And I still got plenty of room to carry my camera and my tripod with me. And if it was colder, I would have room for taking clothes. All kinds of extra clothes with me too. So again, you don't see racks and bags on a racing bike. Why not? Because they paid god-awful money for the thing. The last thing I wanted to do is load it up with weight. So, so you lose all that convenience too. And they try to bring as few of anything they can with them, which really doesn't work out well when you're trying to be self-sufficient. And I ride by myself. I may be 50 miles of home deep into the mountains somewhere. If I break down, I want to be able to fix my own bike. Okay, so the only thing on this bike that didn't come with it are the accessories. Like I said, this whole handlebar system is mine. The rack and the bag's mine. And the water bottles. I do not like to backpack water bottles, so I use just conventional water bottles. Plastic holders. Always buy the plastic holders. Don't buy the aluminum or steel or titanium or carbon fiber. Buy the plastic holders. They're inexpensive. They last forever. I still got the first one I bought some 20 years ago, and it was a really thin thing that I thought was going to last maybe 6 months, and I still got it on the bike. I'm still using it 20 years later. A thin plastic bottle holder. One of the greatest inventions for bikes ever since they were invented. A plastic water bottle holder means you don't have the aluminum bottle holder coming off on the bottle, because as you insert these into aluminum holders, the aluminum is so soft it just comes off on the bottle, coats it all in aluminum, then you get it on your hands, then you touch your face, and now you got aluminum all over yourself. Most ridiculous thing we ever had. I had to live with that for decades. That is one of the greatest joys, is to be out of aluminum bottle holders and into plastic ones. Okay, next is the wheel upgrade. Now I use the wheels that came on here for as long as possible. Wheels that come on the bike are just and wheels and tires that come on the bike are simply an excuse to have a wheel and a tire so you can test ride it. The tires are usually completely worthless and usually so unsafe that you would never want to actually ride them. Like I said, I bought top quality tires here because when you're going down the side of a mountain at 50 miles an hour, you don't want to be worrying about some paper thin tire that could easily just blow out or split or something. Not to mention they handle horribly and they roll with much more resistance than these do. So here I got an aftermarket set of wheels that made by Vuelta. I've been using Vuelta wheels now for a decade. They are the strongest, most inexpensive wheels you can buy. They've been fairly dependable. I had out of all the sets I bought, I had one rear wheel fail after 2 years use. If you're familiar with free hubs, the free hub broke on it, and that's the only problem I've had. I have another wheel set that's 2 or 3 years old, where the free hub is starting to go. But with the rest of them, the problem is wheels are the weakest part of the bicycle. The heavier you are, I weigh 200 pounds, the heavier you are, the more skilled you are, and the more powerful of a rider you are, the wheels will last less and less and less. You combine the three things that I have skill, I have power, and I have heavy weight for being a cyclist. I'm 6 foot tall, so I eat up 200 pounds pretty easy. When I stand to accelerate, when I stand on a hill to climb, the rear wheel takes an enormous amount of stress, and they can only last at maximum 3,000 miles. I've used the finest wheel builders in the world in my racing days, the top wheels, Campanola Super Record hubs, DT spokes, 14 gauge, 36 spoke. And we built those things as strong as possible for the day. They still only lasted 3,000 miles. And even on these really cheap wheels, I'm getting the same mileage, because as soon as the wheel breaks the first spoke, that means the rest of them are ready to break too. Just because that one spoke broke, it's highly unlikely that spoke was a defect. So you got wheels to consider too shortly after you buy the bike, because the wheels may last you a month, they may last you a year or 2 years. It's hard to say. It depends on your body weight. Got flies around me today. So the wheels will last you depending on your body weight, your skill, your power, your pedaling styles too. So wheels are something you're constantly replacing. Chains, cassettes are something you're constantly replacing just due to wear. Tires, of course, you're constantly replacing too. These tires I've been using for a couple years now, and they're not showing a whole lot of wear signs. Plus they're sticky and they're quiet. The only disadvantage to these tires and all other tires that are 26 inch by 2 inch wide are they don't roll perfectly true, and they don't roll perfectly round. It's very disappointing that at $65 per tire, I can't get a tire that's perfectly round and perfectly true. I was using the Surface brand, SERFACE, I think. Surface brand drifter tire, which is the same size tire as this. They were perfectly true and perfectly round, but as they aged, they started getting flats all the time. Even though they had some flat protection in them, it's not enough. I just got another flat yesterday with them. These I have not flatted yet in a couple of years I've been using them, so I'm going to go back to these. I'm not going to use the Surface tires. I experimented with them, and I'm not going to use them. I'm going to equip all my bikes that use 26-inch wheels with this tire here for long distance road traveling. The only thing we got left now is basically a saddle and accessories like a mirror. I wouldn't leave home without a rear view mirror. If you get hit by a car, 99.9% the chances of getting hit by a car is it coming up from behind you. If you don't have a mirror, don't ride your bike. I'm going to say that again. If you don't have a mirror, don't ride your bike. A mirror's going to definitely save your life someday. Get one, learn how to use it, get it adjusted perfectly, and never leave home without it. Never leave home without it. Saddles are personal. You can't take any recommendation from anybody. But if you've tried so many different saddles and nothing's working for you, I'm going to suggest one. And that is the Brooks leather saddle. The Brooks leather saddle is what I raced ultramarathon with, so I spent 300 to 400 miles a day in that saddle. If it wasn't for that saddle, I don't know if I would have survived the race. The reason leather saddles work well is because you have those two pointy sit bones that are covered by muscle and flesh and fat. But they're pointy. You would think a sit bone would have been rounded or flat or something, but no, they come to a triangular point. That triangular point in a leather saddle will eventually build itself into the leather saddle, which means the leather saddle will build that sit bone point to you. It'll build its own custom cup around your own sit bone. And that is probably why those hard leather saddles that have no padding in them are the most comfortable for long distance. You may not like it for a short distance around town, for commuting 5-10 miles. No, I don't think so. But if you're having trouble on longer rides, you may want to try the Brooks leather saddle. Just a suggestion, like I said, saddles are highly personal. Right now I'm using WTB saddles that have the channel in them to protect you. And for me, they're working out the best because the foam has got the perfect density where it doesn't bottom out into the frame of the saddle. If you got really soft foam, you're basically going to just sit right through it and then be sitting on the hard frame of the saddle. You need high density foam that's stiffer so that there's a point where it stops before it gets to the bottom and you're sitting on the hard frame. I may have a special video for seats eventually, but those are a few quickie suggestions today. And the last would be pedals. Pedals, again, highly individual. These are SPD pedals, which means the feet get locked in. They work just like a ski binding. You step into them and you're locked in. Some of you may say, that's a horrid thing. I don't want to be locked to the bike like that. That's a horrid thing. But that's again, it's a personal choice. But for me, it's a safety issue, and I would never want to ride seriously at any kind of speed on the road without being locked into the pedals. And clipless is the best way to be locked in. Being locked into the pedals means it's a safety thing, number one. When riding and rolling hills, or if I'm doing high speed time trialing, I get out of the saddle and just want to shift. I don't want to be sitting in the same position as I'm time trialing at 20, 25, 30 miles an hour. I don't want to be sitting in the same position all the time. So I want to get out of the saddle. I shift up to my highest gear, get out of the saddle, and do a little cranking out of the saddle to feel good. You do not want to slip off the pedals at 25 miles an hour. That's a disaster. So that's the safety issue. The other thing is, when riding rolling hills, the efficient way to ride them is to pedal down the hill, pedal up the other side of the hill, keeping speed, and then as you get close to the crest of the hill, you get out of the saddle and you kind of do a little out of the saddle sprint, not so much a sprint, but just a jump to get over the hump and then start down the other side. Again, you're moving very fast, and I don't want my feet loose and have the chance of slipping off the pedals. The second reason is, of course, efficiency. There's all different kinds of pedal strokes. I have a video on pedal strokes. I'll leave the link. If you're not completely locked into the pedals, you lose 50% of your efficiency on riding, maybe even more than 50%. Being locked onto the pedals means you can relax the legs. For one, that is a huge part to for feeling good over long distance. Being locked into the pedals allow you to pull through the bottom and up across the top, allows you to push across the top. The power stroke down the front, of course, you can relax your leg because your feet you don't need to put pressure on the pedals to keep your feet there. So now you can do a high spin, a high cadence without your feet just moving all over the place, without even thinking about replacing your foot. And of course, adjustment's very important, and your foot will be in the absolute perfect place for pedaling all the time. Again, it's preference. A lot of people think it's too dangerous to have your feet locked in. It's probably too dangerous if you're riding town and you're not used to them, yeah. And if you use them for the first time, just about everybody I know has fallen over as they get to a stop sign and they forgot that they are clipped in. And by the time they realize it, they're already falling over. And it happened to me the first time I used them. It happened to just about everybody I knew. So, being clipped in may mean you're going to fall once. And all it takes is once for you to remember for the rest of your life. That when you come to a stop, you got to be releasing your feet from the clip. But again, that's personal preference. It's a safety issue, an efficiency issue for me. And that's recreational riding with a bike. This bike cost, base price was $320. Of course, there's a lot of extras on here with the wheels replaced. Wheels cost me $65. The frame, or the rack, was $30. The bag was $50. Water bottles were $20 a piece. water bottle cages, probably 20 a piece. Tires, $65 a piece. SBD clipless pedals, about $60 a piece, or $60 a pair. And that's about it. The mirror is 15 bucks. Clip-on arrow bars, 50. Extensions, about $15. And that's how you can ride recreationally with a mountain bike and do it all. And it's a great way to get started. And I will be leaving in the description again, maybe, or at the end of this video, I may post some of the parts that I recommend buying for that are inexpensive and extremely strong. Now, I hope this clears up a lot of things when it comes to choosing a bike. You know, price has nothing to do with anything. So I hope this really helps you choose a bike that is strong, dependable, and you really don't have to worry about. And it's a great way to get started. And like I said, as your experience grows, you're going to know exactly what you want the next time. So that's it. See you next time.